Brisbane Airport says its latest flight path changes will reduce direct overflight for almost 140,000 residents, but those same changes will also allow aircraft to arrive simultaneously on both runways during busy periods. South East Queensland's reduced rail timetable could now continue until at least late September, with 26 six-car trains caught in a growing maintenance backlog. And the Brisbane 2032 venue plan is facing fresh scrutiny, with Rockhampton's rowing course still awaiting international approval and Canberra seeking evidence that the National Aquatic Centre represents value for money. We can keep you in the loop thanks to the support of some excellent local businesses. This week we can thank YB Painting and Excel Psychology. I'm Adam and this is the Brisbane Channel, where you can stay in the know about the stories shaping Greater Brisbane. Let's get updated. There is a common thread running through several of this week's biggest stories. A headline number or announcement can sound decisive, but once you look underneath it, the picture is often much more complicated. Let's start with Brisbane Airport, where a package of flight path changes is being promoted as reducing direct overflight for almost 140,000 residents. Air Services Australia has confirmed the precise figure is 138,400 unique people. But this is a gross reduction. Around 6,000 residents are expected to become newly overflown under one of the altered arrival paths, and they have not been subtracted from the headline figure. Most of the package is also not operating yet. So far, only one overland arrival change has commenced, associated with around 34,800 fewer people being directly overflown. The remaining changes are either awaiting safety approval or still being developed. One of those proposals could provide a particularly noticeable benefit at night. Air Services is considering a departure path that would have aircraft make an early right turn toward the Port of Brisbane and Moreton Bay rather than continuing across the city. That could divert some nighttime departures away from a large part of Brisbane, but it still requires further safety assessment, a change to the current policy governing use of the new runway at night, and real-world testing. There is also an important qualification around the headline number. Air Services defines someone as directly overflown when they live within 1 kilometre either side of a flight path centreline. That's not the same as measuring how many people will experience a defined reduction in aircraft noise. For the change already introduced, the direct overflight calculation falls by 34,800 people. But under a separate measure counting people expected to experience at least 10 daily noise events of 60 decibels or more, the net reduction is only 867. Those figures measure different things, but they show why the claim of almost 140,000 fewer people being overflown shouldn't be interpreted as almost 140,000 people receiving a measurable reduction in noise. The changes also have an operational purpose. 2 of the new paths are intended to allow aircraft to arrive independently on both runways at the same time, while the noise assessments use current traffic volumes rather than modelling the airport's expected future growth. So parts of this package could deliver meaningful improvements, particularly if the proposed nighttime path works as intended, but the headline figure does not tell the whole story about noise exposure, where aircraft will instead be concentrated, or how conditions may change as flight numbers increase. I'm working on a separate explainer going through the calculations, the individual paths, and what the noise modelling can and cannot tell us, so keep an eye out for that video over the next week or two. Another announcement that sounds more settled than it really is concerns Brisbane 2032. Queensland's revised venue plan is facing some fresh pressure from the federal government, particularly over Olympic rowing and the proposed National Aquatic Centre. The Queensland government has selected the Fitzroy River in Rockhampton as its preferred rowing venue, arguing the Games should deliver benefits beyond South East Queensland. But Federal Sports Minister and Brisbane 2032 Organising Committee Vice President Annika Wells has made it clear that Queensland cannot settle the matter entirely on its own. Wells said international sporting federations ultimately sign off Olympic venues, and that Queensland must seek and receive agreement from World Rowing before Rockhampton can be confirmed. The most recent status update she referred to was several months old, but at that point World Rowing had not provided its final decision. That matters because, as we've previously covered here on the channel, concerns have been raised about whether conditions on the Fitzroy River would provide a sufficiently fair and reliable Olympic course. Wells said she had been discussing those concerns with international federations and from the perspective of athletes, while also raising them through the Brisbane 2032 Organising Committee. So while Queensland has chosen Rockhampton as its preferred location, the international approval process is clearly not finished. Wells was also asked about the City of Moreton Bay's proposal for a purpose-built permanent flatwater centre. She indicated that alternatives of this kind had been part of regular discussions among Brisbane 2032's leadership group, but stressed that formal venue options are ultimately put forward by the Queensland Government. So while there's no indication Moreton Bay is about to replace Rockhampton, it does suggest the proposal has entered the broader leadership conversation if the Fitzroy River fails to secure the support required. And there's also some federal pressure building around the proposed National Aquatic Centre at Spring Hill. The government's overall games contribution is capped at $3.435 billion, and Wells said Queensland must deliver its commitments within that funding package. When she was asked directly whether the federal government supported the aquatic centre, she stopped short of endorsing it. Instead, she said the Commonwealth was waiting for evidence that Queensland's venue decisions represent value for national taxpayers, arguing the spending needs to be defensible to someone in Broome or Devonport, not only people here in Brisbane. So at this stage, the federal government is not necessarily rejecting Queensland's plan, but it is publicly making two things clear. Rockhampton still needs the approval of World Rowing, and Queensland will need to demonstrate that projects such as the National Aquatic Centre provide sufficient value before expecting the Commonwealth to share the cost. That reinforces something we're likely to hear repeatedly over the coming years. Queensland may have announced its preferred Brisbane 2032 venue plan, but several of its most controversial pieces will still depend on international approvals, detailed business cases, and negotiations over who will actually pay for them. A quick thanks now to channel sponsor YB Painting Services. If you're planning to upgrade your home or workspace, YB is offering channel viewers an exclusive 10% discount. The multi-award-winning team offers fixed pricing and a 5-year warranty on their work, so you know exactly what you're getting up front. You can claim your discount by scanning the QR code on screen or through the link in the video description. From long-term planning to a problem affecting commuters right now, the end of industrial action would not mean the immediate end of South East Queensland's reduced train timetable. Reduced services could now continue until at least late September, even if the current action ended immediately. Queensland Rail has 26 six-car trains unavailable because of a growing maintenance backlog, up from 22 last month. That means almost a quarter of its 112 train fleet is currently out of service. The backlog includes work such as wheel machining and has accumulated during months of protected industrial action involving several rail unions. The network has been operating on a reduced timetable since April, with many peak hour services running every 15 minutes. That has led to crowded platforms and packed carriages, particularly on some of the longer lines into Brisbane. But this is no longer just a question of when Queensland Rail and the unions reach an agreement. Even after the industrial action ends, the outstanding maintenance will need to be completed before enough trains are available to restore the normal timetable, and Queensland Rail says that process could take until at least late September. Queensland Rail blames maintenance restrictions imposed during protected industrial action by the Australian Manufacturing Workers Union, the Rail, Tram and Bus Union, and the Electrical Trades Union. The unions argue the action forms part of negotiations over wages, working conditions, and workforce issues, so responsibility for the prolonged dispute remains contested. But the practical result for passengers is clear. Fewer trains are available, services are less frequent, and the trains still operating are carrying more people. There's also a broader fleet issue beyond the immediate backlog. Queensland is building 65 new 6-car trains at Torbanlea, but they will enter service progressively through to 2032. Better Transport Queensland argues the network will remain constrained during peak periods until more of those trains are operating alongside Cross River Rail. Queensland Rail's own data indicates overall network reliability has remained stable, so warnings of worsening disruption over several years should be treated as an expert forecast rather than an established trend. So even if there is finally movement at the negotiating table, commuters shouldn't be expecting the regular timetable to return immediately. For commuters considering driving while train services remain reduced, there's another familiar problem returning at the Bowser. RACQ says some fuel retailers appear to be trying to re-establish South East Queensland's lengthy petrol price cycle, with individual stations increasing unleaded prices by as much as 30 cents per litre over the past week. On Monday, Brisbane's average unleaded price was about $1.72 a litre, while roughly 1 in 10 stations across South East Queensland were already charging just under $2. RACQ says this resembles the beginning of the usual price hike phase, when a small number of stations lift prices and wait to see whether competitors follow. Before the cycle was disrupted earlier this year, South East Queensland motorists could see prices leap by 50 or 60 cents at individual stations before gradually falling again over 6 to 8 weeks. According to the ACCC, Brisbane's average cycle lasts about 6.5 weeks, the longest of Australia's major cities. RACQ argues motorists actually received a fairer deal while that cycle was absent. Its latest report shows the indicative retail margin on unleaded petrol fell from 21.2 cents per litre in the March quarter to 10.5 cents in the June quarter, the lowest South East Queensland has recorded since 2019. The fuel industry disputes the idea that the cycle is inherently unfair. The Australian Convenience and Petroleum Marketers Association says the rises and falls demonstrate competition because motorists can compare prices and avoid stations that increase them too early. RACQ takes the opposite view and says the latest increases strengthen the case for limiting daily price rises to 5 cents per litre, which it believes could break the long cycle or reduce it to something closer to the weekly system operating in Perth. The remaining temporary federal fuel tax relief is also scheduled to end on the 2nd of August, potentially adding around another 16 cents per litre if the change is fully passed through. So motorists may soon be dealing with both the return of Brisbane's drawn-out price cycle and the restoration of the full fuel tax, just as reduced train services are leaving many commuters with fewer attractive alternatives. And from the cost of filling the car to the much bigger cost of buying a home, Brisbane's property market is producing some seemingly contradictory headlines. Domain is forecasting that Brisbane could overtake Sydney as Australia's most expensive capital city unit market within the next year. Its forecast has Brisbane's median unit price rising to around $861,000, while Sydney's could fall to around $821,000. But more immediate figures suggest Brisbane's broader housing market is beginning to cool. Cotality says Brisbane's dwelling values still rose 0.3% in June, 1.3% over the quarter and 17.4% over the year, leaving them at a record high. However, over the 28 days to July 14, Brisbane values slipped by 0.2%. Perth was the only major capital still recording growth over that shorter period. There are also signs buyers now have more choice. In the 4 weeks to July 12, Brisbane received only 0.8% more new listings than a year earlier, but the total number of properties advertised for sale was 23.2% higher. That suggests homes are accumulating on the market because they're being absorbed more slowly. Brisbane homes are now taking a median of 23 days to sell, compared with 21 days a year ago, while the typical discount from the original asking price has widened from 3.1 to 3.4%. Auction results are also weaker. The latest Brisbane clearance rate was around 43%, compared with almost 63% at the same time last year. But the slowdown is not affecting every part of the market equally. Over the June quarter, values in Brisbane's least expensive quarter of the market rose 2.6%, compared with just 0.4% at the top. So the forecast for Brisbane units and the evidence of a cooling market can both be true. Brisbane dwelling values remain substantially higher than a year ago, and the lower priced end of the market has continued to record the fastest growth. But momentum has slowed, stock is building, and buyers appear to have more negotiating power. That's not evidence of a property crash, but it does suggest the extremely seller-friendly conditions of the past year may finally be starting to ease slightly. Another headline number requiring some unpacking concerns fire ants. The Queensland Government says its latest suppression work has produced a substantial reduction across parts of South East Queensland. According to the government, fire ant populations fell by an average of 86% across larger land parcels in some of the most heavily infested areas. More than 185,000 hectares have now been treated by aerial application across parts of Brisbane, Ipswich, Logan, Redland City, the Scenic Rim, Somerset and the Gold Coast. But the 86% figure needs to be interpreted carefully. After I'd finished recording the video, the Fire Ant Suppression Task Force has provided some additional detail about that figure. It says the result comes from surveys conducted by FAST staff on treated rural properties where multiple suppression treatments reduced fire ant nest densities by an average of 86%. That gives us a clearer idea of what was measured, but FAST has not said how many properties were surveyed, where they were located, how much the results varied, or whether the findings were independently verified. So it still shouldn't be interpreted as an 86% reduction across the entire 185,000 hectares treated, or across southeast Queensland more broadly. The task force says more than 1,170 farmers are now actively suppressing fire ants on their properties, and it plans to continue suppression work across approximately 530,000 hectares of heavily infested land until eradication treatment can be undertaken in those areas. That distinction remains important. Suppression can substantially reduce nest densities and limit the immediate impacts, but it doesn't mean fire ants have been eliminated. The Queensland Government has committed another $10.5 million for this work in 2026-27 on top of its existing $61 million commitment to the Suppression Task Force and separate from its contribution to the National Eradication Program. So the new information makes the 86% result more meaningful and encouraging, but we still need more detail before judging how representative or lasting that reduction will be. Before we continue, a quick reminder that local sponsors help make these updates possible, but viewers do as well. If you find this coverage useful and would like to help make sure it can continue, you can become a channel member or make a one-off contribution through Buy Me a Coffee. The links are in the description and the Buy Me a Coffee QR code is on screen now. Every bit of support helps me spend more time researching and covering the stories shaping Greater Brisbane. Now, from the detail behind this week's major headlines to the physical changes taking shape across Greater Brisbane. In the centre of the region, plans have finally been lodged to revive the largely vacant Wintergarden precinct. IFM Investors has submitted a development application to Brisbane City Council for an overhaul of parts of the complex. The proposal would refurbish 2 retail gallery levels beneath the Intercontinental Hotel, improving the pedestrian connection between Queen Street Mall and Elizabeth Street. Existing walls would be removed, escalators relocated, and new lifts and floor areas added. The hotel entrance would also be upgraded, although the hotel tower itself is not part of this application. One of the most visible changes would be the removal of the large butterfly facade facing Queen Street Mall. The 86 by 25 metre installation was unveiled in 2012 and includes around 24,000 LED lights. The development plans would remove it and restore the building facade behind it. Wintergarden opened ahead of the 1982 Commonwealth Games and once contained 92 specialty stores and a busy food court. But much of the centre has emptied in recent years, leaving boarded shop fronts and only a relatively small amount of remaining businesses. It's worth noting that this application appears more limited than the broader redevelopment vision previously promoted for the precinct. Earlier plans promoted under the previous ownership included landscaped laneways, a revived food and beverage offering, a public sky garden, and around 12,000 square metres of renewed retail space. But that project didn't proceed as originally scheduled. I asked IFM how the newly lodged application fits into that wider vision and whether it could provide a construction timetable. A spokesperson from IFM Investors said it remained committed to developing a world-class mixed-use precinct and believed the application would deliver the best outcome for the precinct and community. But it did not provide a timeline or clarify whether this is the first stage of a larger redevelopment. So the application is at least a tangible step towards bringing more activity back to Wintergarden. But after years of proposals and delays, the real test will be whether the project gains approval, moves into construction, and ultimately attracts enough businesses and visitors to make the centre feel active again. Wintergarden is about trying to revive an established urban centre. At the other end of the growth equation, new communities are putting pressure on infrastructure before they are fully built out. In Greater Flagstone, early works have begun on a major intersection upgrade connecting Homestead Drive, Teviot Road and Glinton Road. The junction already carries around 12,000 vehicles a day. That pressure is expected to increase substantially as the area develops, with the Greater Flagstone Priority Development Area planned to accommodate about 51,500 homes and up to 138,000 people over several decades. Crews have started clearing, fencing and relocating underground water services, with the main construction work and installation of the traffic lights planned later this year. The council-funded project is also intended to improve access to Flagstone Central, local businesses and the future Riverbend community. It's one relatively contained road project, but it reflects the much larger challenge facing Greater Flagstone, trying to deliver transport infrastructure quickly enough to keep pace with tens of thousands of new homes. That challenge, trying to match jobs, shops and infrastructure with population growth, is also playing out in Narangba. Public consultation will open later this month on plans for the eastern section of the Narangba Innovation Precinct. The proposed planning scheme amendment is intended to support more employment and industrial land, with submissions open from July 27 to August 24th. This is not the same project as the much larger Narangba East planning investigation. That investigation covers around 1,020 hectares and is still examining the longer-term balance between jobs, housing, infrastructure and environmental constraints. Council says that work is responding partly to a shortage of employment land across the city. A neighbourhood shopping centre has also been proposed near Callaghan and Morgan Roads, including a supermarket, specialty stores, medical services and gym, another sign of the area's continuing growth. And in Redland City, several smaller decisions are also shaping how land, infrastructure and council funding will be managed. A revised package of city plan amendments has been endorsed after 49 submissions, including keeping the existing 2-metre canal wall setback at Raby Bay and abandoning a proposed neighbourhood centre on Colburn Avenue at Victoria Point. Council is also taking 6 advocacy motions to the Local Government Association of Queensland conference, including calls for the state to pay rates on state-owned land and contribute more toward the cost of operating council CCTV networks. Planning is also continuing for the broader Birkdale Community Precinct, including civil infrastructure and high-voltage electricity works. That's separate from the federal environmental referral process for the proposed Whitewater Centre, which we've previously covered. None of those decisions delivers an immediate transformation, but together they show how councils across Greater Brisbane are grappling with the same wider task, determining where growth should go, what infrastructure needs to accompany it, and who should pay for the services surrounding it. Growth is one side of that equation. The other is how people and goods move through the region, and 2 very different projects show how transport changes can range from small practical interventions to major industrial shifts. At the Gabba, Bicycle Queensland and Microbility have launched a free supervised bike parking service around 100 metres from the stadium. The soft launch attracted about 20 riders who were able to leave their bikes in a monitored area during the Brisbane Lions game rather than searching for somewhere secure nearby. The service is expected to operate for the Lions' remaining home games this season. 20 riders is not enough to demonstrate large-scale demand, particularly from a first trial with limited public awareness. But this is an encouraging start, and the kind of relatively simple measure that can make cycling to a major event more practical for people who are already willing to ride. Event transport discussions often focus on expensive new infrastructure or additional public transport capacity. Secure parking for cyclists will not replace either of those, but it addresses one of the much smaller barriers that can still determine whether someone feels comfortable leaving the car at home. From a small transport trial at the Gabba to a much larger milestone in local manufacturing, Volvo Group Australia has begun producing battery electric trucks at Wacol. The company describes them as Australia's first electric trucks built locally by a major vehicle manufacturer. International specialists were brought in to train and upskill local workers ahead of production, with the company describing the first completed trucks as proof that zero tailpipe emission heavy vehicles can be manufactured locally to a global standard. The federal government is also supporting the transition through a $70 million Clean Energy Finance Corporation investment. That funding is intended to provide discounted finance for freight operators and reduce uncertainty around the future resale value of electric trucks, two major barriers for businesses considering the switch from diesel. The government says growing demand could eventually support more than 1,000 jobs at Wacol. But local production is only part of the challenge. Volvo says wider adoption will also depend on charging infrastructure, electricity grid capacity, consistent road weight rules, and whether operators can make electric trucks work across their actual routes and depots. So this is a significant manufacturing milestone, but the bigger test will be how quickly locally built electric trucks move from the factory floor into regular freight fleets. Now a quick thanks to channel sponsor Excel Psychology. If you need support with things such as anxiety, depression, managing ADHD, or relationship challenges, you should consider contacting Excel. They're a warm and inclusive psychology practice based in Spring Hill, just a short walk from Central Station. They have a diverse team of clinical and registered psychologists, and they focus on matching you with the right person for your needs, often with relatively short wait times. They offer Medicare rebates with a mental health treatment plan, along with support for work cover and NDIS participants. You can find out more by scanning the QR code on screen or through the link in the description. Beyond transport, planning, and physical development, a city is also shaped by what people actually do in it and when they do it. A new report suggests Brisbane's economy outside standard business hours is already much larger and broader than many people might assume. The Measuring the Australian Nighttime Economy report counted 7,833 core nighttime economy establishments across the Brisbane City Council area during the 2024-25 year. Together, they generated an estimated $13.1 billion in turnover, around 4% more than the previous year. The number of core nighttime establishments is also now 20% higher than it was before the pandemic. But nighttime economy doesn't just mean pubs, clubs, and live music. The report covers businesses operating between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., including restaurants, takeaway shops, gyms, entertainment venues, and other services. Food-focused businesses account for around 2/3 of Brisbane's total. Thursday is now the busiest evening, with 64% of these businesses open between 6 and 9 p.m, slightly more than on Friday or Saturday. Brisbane also has an unusually active dawn economy, as we've covered previously. Around 1 in 5 establishments are open between 3 and 6 a.m. on weekdays, driven partly by early opening cafes, fitness venues, and service businesses. The report ranks Brisbane ahead of the City of Sydney and the City of Melbourne for both the number of establishments and turnover, but that comparison needs some context. These are the local government areas, not equivalent metropolitan regions, and Brisbane City Council covers a vastly larger area and population than either of those inner city councils. So this doesn't necessarily mean Brisbane has a bigger traditional nightlife scene than Sydney or Melbourne. And that distinction is important because operators within Brisbane's conventional nightlife sector are warning that the city could still miss an opportunity to strengthen its after-dark culture before 2032. Queensland Nightlife Commissioner John Collins handed the state government his first major report in February. It reportedly contains more than 60 recommendations spanning liquor licensing, trading hours, noise regulation, venue compliance, placemaking, and the management of entertainment precincts. The report has not yet been publicly released, although the government says it will publish both the document and its formal response together. Some of the proposals understood to be under consideration include longer trading hours, changes to noise compliance rules, and more flexible requirements for ID scanners at lower risk venues. Because the report itself remains private, the precise recommendations and their supporting evidence can't yet be independently assessed. But operators in Fortitude Valley are already calling for reforms, including a trial of 5 a.m. trading, simpler rules for lower risk venues, greater flexibility during major events, and clearer coordination between venues, police, council, and the state government. They argue Brisbane needs greater certainty now if businesses are expected to invest ahead of the Olympic and Paralympic Games. The government says it is methodically considering the recommendations so it can produce a comprehensive and practical action plan. The opposition argues the delay is leaving venues and other small businesses without the certainty they were promised. There are also legitimate competing considerations here. Longer trading hours and more flexible noise rules could help venues and encourage a more active late-night culture. But they can also affect nearby residents, worker safety, policing requirements, public transport, and alcohol-related harm, particularly as more housing is built close to established entertainment precincts. So the two reports tell complementary parts of Brisbane's after-dark story. Economic activity between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. is already substantial and spread well beyond the CBD, from Fortitude Valley and South Bank to suburban centres such as Chermside, Carindale, Mount Gravatt and Indooroopilly. But much of that strength comes from food, fitness and early morning services, not necessarily from people staying out later. The next test will be whether the Nightlife Commissioner's report produces reforms that can support cultural venues and late-night businesses while still managing the impacts that come with a genuinely busier city after dark. And perhaps the most Brisbane part of the current result is that our distinctive contribution to the nighttime economy may not yet be staying out later, but getting started earlier. And I'll be keeping the Nightlife Commissioner's report and the government's response on my radar when they're finally released. For a more literal example of Greater Brisbane coming alive, Ipswich may have broken the world record for the largest trombone ensemble. More than 600 musicians gathered at Tulma Place to perform 76 trombones. That comfortably exceeds the existing record of 368, but Guinness World Records still needs to verify the submission before it becomes official. So I'll be keeping an eye out for that final announcement. Don't forget that I'm working on a separate, more detailed video that will unpack changes to the flight paths, how the headline figure was calculated, and what the noise modelling can and cannot tell us. That'll be coming to the channel soon, so keep an eye out for it. I'll also be publishing a new podcast episode, and there's 3 other topical videos in the works as well, so check back over the next few weeks. There's going to be a lot more content beyond just the weekly updates. See you there, because we're done.